One of the more commonly asked questions on my channel recently comes in the form of Steve Nipper Ellis and his claims that his father was indeed responsible for the murders of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe. In this video we're going to take a look at the James English podcast, and afterwards I'm going to be sharing my own thoughts and feelings on how plausible I believe this to be.
It was a crime which pushed everything else off the front pages. 3 men, all known criminals, found shot dead in the Essex countryside. It was a cold-blooded, professional killing. The victims had many enemies, but which one wanted them executed?
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below.
How did Tony accept you then?
Pat and I still did our criminal sort of things, which I don't know how much he told Tony. I don't know. From what I remember, one of the first times, Tony used to inject coke, and so did Craig, who was Tony's little gopher. Pat and I, we were friends, and I'm sure we were. I know we were, right? Tony and Craig was Tony's little gopher. If Tony wanted to sell some drugs, Craig would run it. So those two used to do gear. They used to inject coke. So we was round Tony's. It was Tony's or Craig. I think it might have been Craig's actually. We was round Craig's one night, and they did. They had some coke in a syringe and they injected it. And I remember Tony injected Pat. And Pat the next morning, I just walked out. And Pat said, when Pat came in the next morning, or whatever the morning, day and a half later, he said, "I could see the disgust on your face." I went, "Yeah." So why you got to stick a needle in yourself to get high? You cross a line then. They became like birds of a feather. They were little junkies together. I don't know when Pat started doing heroin, but from his post-mortem, there was heroin in him.
When did you start distancing yourself from them? Were you getting pushed aside or were you trying to leave them?
Yeah, I was more sort of like I said, they became like birds of a feather. They wouldn't do your drugs. I wanted it. If I was doing ecstasy, great. But if they're injecting gear, they ain't nothing to do with me. And I remember Pat came in I was cleaning the house once. I had the flat. And I said, Pat lived with me. I was cleaning the flat, and in my wardrobe there was a plate with some coke on it or whatever. There was a coke, a straw, or rolled up note, whatever it was. And I just crystals. It was crack. He was doing crack. So it was in my wardrobe. So I threw it. I washed it down the sink. When he came in, he's gone nuts. I went, hang on, they're in my flat, in my wardrobe. I'm the one who gets freaking nicked. So he went bananas. Excuse me, sorry. So we had an argument. I said, bollocks, bollocks. I'm not going to swear because I don't like swearing. I said, bollocks, Pat, sod off. You don't like it, leave. I don't care. Don't bother me. Don't bring your crap in the house. It wasn't me being a hypocrite. I didn't want a load of drugs in the sodding house, because if I got nicked, I'm the one who's going to go down for it, aren't I? I got nicked when I was 21 for selling whiz. So anyway, we started falling out like that. And then one day he came home, he came back and he said, we were sort of losing the friendship. And he said to me, Tony's jealous of our friendship. And I went, why? I didn't understand what he was saying then. But from what I can only gather from looking back on it for years, Tony just didn't like me. He just didn't like me. He wanted Pat's friendship for himself. Pat was a false. He was a very powerful man.
Okay, so let's just cut in here so I can share my own thoughts on what we've heard so far. Now, we have Steve Nipper Ellis talking about his relationship with Pat Tate and how that changed once Tony Tucker came on the scene. Now, this is often echoed in other statements from other people, that Tucker was jealous of Tate's friendships with other people. He liked to keep Tate all for himself. And I think that is what is almost echoed here from Steve Nipper Ellis. As soon as Tucker came on the scene, he was almost trying to pull Tate away from his other close friendships.
When Pat, Tony and Craig get killed in '95, where were you?
I was out that night, but I wasn't there, unfortunately. I didn't even, as I told this story, you want to hear the story?
Yeah.
The story, right. Right, first of all, there's 3 police that have recently made a a film or made a statement saying there was no evidence against my dad. Yeah, obviously, because my dad never got nicked. If there was evidence, they'd have called him in. My dad told me I was out that night. I was trying to nick something, probably a lorry or something. That's what I used to do. I like nicking lorry loads of gear. So I was out that night. I didn't have the mobile phone with me. When I got home, there was a missed call from my dad. So whatever time I got back, I can't remember if it was 10, 11, whatever. There was a missed call. I thought I won't phone him back. I'll call him in the morning. So the next morning the phone's rung. Now I've got these times 6 or 7 in my head. It might have been 7 or 8. I can't remember what flipping time it was, but I remember the phone rang, and I was asleep. I don't sleep until late, so I've answered the phone, and he's going, "They're dead, they're dead, they're dead, they're dead," and he's laughing. I'm like, "What are you on about, Dad?" And he said, "Pat, Tony, and Pete are dead. Pete Cuffy, Pat, obviously Pat, Tony, and Pete Cuffy, not Craig Rolfe." I said, "Dad, what are you on about?" He said, "They're dead, they're dead." And I think I started crying. I said, "Dad, what have you done?" He went, "Don't worry, no one knows. Not even your stepmum knows." He said, "Nobody knows." I said, "Dad," and I was crying. "What the hell have you done?" So anyway, we're talking, and I said, "I'll call you back." So I think I went down might be wrong, I think I went down the phone box then and spoke to him, and he was saying Pat, Tony, and Pete. And I couldn't believe it. So all that day, I was listening to the radio, and it was either 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. These are the numbers I got in my mind. I don't know why, I'm probably totally wrong. It was the first time I heard it announced on the news that day, that night. Obviously, the next... If they got killed at night, right, it was the next night I heard it on the news. They didn't get found till the morning of the 8th, wasn't it? 6th, I can't remember the frigging date. They got, whatever morning they got found on, it wasn't announced on the news until later that night. Now, on the news, they said Pat, Tony, and Craig. Obviously, my dad had got it wrong, right? But he didn't know Pete, and he didn't know Craig. So people say, "Do you believe your dad done it?" And I'm like, well, like my sister as well. Those police who released that story, they spoke to my sister. My sister, I'm not going to say her name. And she said, "Yes, Dad told us in the morning." Now, my dad knew about it early in the morning. My sister Natalie, he phoned us. I've just said her name. Right. My sister, I wasn't going to say her name. It don't matter. It's fine. She got told in the morning as well. People say, "Do you believe it?" I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it, even though they screwed up my life so much, so bad.
So over the last 20 years, there's been 2 men in prison for the Essex Boys murders.
I know for a fact they didn't do it.
Yeah. And
John Wilmes.
John Wilmes.
Jack Wilmes, sorry.
So
sorry, Jack.
You know who done the murders of Pat, Tony, and Craig? Who was it that done the murders?
And well, it's my dad. Look, he said this story that the Free Police released. Right, they said there was a guy who walked down a back alley, or not down a back alley, across the field and through the back gate. Right, killed the guys. This guy's someone Jasper. I can't remember his name.
Billy Jasper.
If that's what his name is. So when this story came out from the Free Police, people said, "Well, did your dad know Billy Jasper?" I'm like, "I don't know. I've got my friends. If you say to me, if I tell about a crime I committed, I talk about Malcolm, right? I've done crimes with other people, but they're still alive, so I'm not going to tell you their names. My dad had his criminal little, like say he was banged up at 8, he was wanting to prove school at the age of 8, he done bird up until he was like in his mid-20s, in and out, like I used to be, being a wally. So he had his, I don't know who he knew. I know he had friends up near Chafford 100. I know he had friends further on. He had loads of friends, different places.
Did he ever admit to you that he'd done it?
He said he'd done it.
And what was going through your mind when you found out that we're dead?
I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't. I was frightened what he'd done. I really was frightened what my dad had done. I was crying. Yeah, I was crying.
Were you close to Jack Wilmes or Mick Steele?
No.
Did you know them? Are you not worried you could get done for perverting the course of justice?
No, because I didn't. When I was living down in Bournemouth at the time, when their solicitor when I found out that Mick and Jack had been nicked, their solicitor came to see me, wanted to know everything, obviously. And I said, "Look, I will stand in court and swear black was blue, it was me who did it, right, to get them off, right, to get them off." I just knew they was innocent, right? And I would have stood in court and swear it's me that had done it. Then you've got to prove it, haven't you? You know, okay, so we're nicking you for it. Fine, nick me. I wanted to have I wish I'd been there that night because I'd have made them pieces of shit suffer.
Okay, so initial impressions of this particular interview. The first thing that you need to remember at home is that this interview, I believe, was actually the second interview that he gave. His original interview was done with Liquid Bullet Productions quite a while before this, a couple of months at least, before this particular interview was filmed. Now, in that original interview, it was all very clear, all very concise. My dad killed the Essex boys. He was responsible. There was another person in a Range Rover. My dad was down the lane. All very concise, all very in order, all very confident that my dad was the killer of the Essex boys. Yet in this interview, to me, it sounds like the complete opposite. It's very stuttery. It's very sort of, well, that's what he told me. You've got to remember that after this original interview, there was quite a storm created by this. So there was people contacting Steve Ellis, possibly even the police, to ask him to answer questions regarding that initial interview. So there was, as I say, a massive storm created over that initial interview with Liquid Bullet. But there is nothing in either interview which really substantiates these claims that his dad in fact was responsible for the murders of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe. There's no talk of the exact weapon, what happened to that weapon, could it be recovered, the timings, when did these murders take place. There's no real in-depth discussion about how these individuals were lured to the bottom of Workhouse Lane. And, you know, this was all kind of brought about by the fact that his dad sadly passed away 4 years before he made these interviews. So that leaves the question, okay, so if you had known this information since day one, then why would you not come out with this information straight after your father passed away? If that was the reason that you're now able to come forward to tell this story, why was this not done 1 or 6 months after his passing, not 4 years later? What I'm going to read out for you now is a newspaper article which came out just a few days after the murders of Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, where Steve Nipper Ellis is sharing his thoughts on the murders. Now, what I want you to ask yourselves at home is, if your dad had called you up and said, look, I'm responsible for these murders, I've killed them, I've got rid of them, whatever, would you be approaching the Sun newspaper to do an interview? Would you be doing any sort of interview at all with the tabloids? Ask yourself that question at home. The following newspaper article is from the 13th of December 1995 with the headline, How Do You Want to Die? A Single Shot or Piece by Piece with an Axe? 3 drug barons executed in a country lane were offered a chilling choice of how they died: blasted through the head with a shotgun or hacked to pieces with an axe. Patrick Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe opted for the gun. They were found dead in their Range Rover after a volley of blasts from pump-action weapons. The gangsters' last seconds were outlined yesterday by former associate Steve Nipper Ellis, who was quizzed by police over an unsuccessful bid to murder 18-stone muscle man Tate a year ago. Ellis, 30, said, quote, They were given 2 options. They could be taken apart with an axe, starting with their fingers, moving onto their hands and then their legs, or they could opt for the quick way out, an execution shot through the back of the head. They were told either way, you're going to get it. There's no escape. Tucker and Tate messed their trousers first, then took the shots. Tate, 37, was executed with 2 blasts to the head and 1 in the chest in the back of the car. Tucker, 38, and henchman Rolfe, 26, were slumped in the front seats with their brains blown out. Ellis, dubbed Nipper because he is just 5 foot 5 inches tall, confirmed the 3 were lured to the snow-covered farm track in Rettendon with the promise of another drugs deal. He said, quote, They had double-crossed too many people. They had made too many enemies. They often went to these meets, snatched the supplies and beat up the suppliers, but they did it once too often and were set up themselves. Detectives believe the thugs were driven from the rendezvous spot to the murder scene at gunpoint, then ambushed by at least 2 other gunmen. Ellis, who has a string of convictions, is a suspect for the triple murder because of his arrest for the earlier attempt on Tate's life. He said, quote, It wasn't me who did the shooting. I just know what happened from a very reliable source. But I'd love to shake the hand of the man who did it. He's my hero. And I'll regret to my dying days that I could not take the credit for it. End quote. The first attempt to kill Tate came at his £250,000 bungalow in Rettendon Essex a year ago. A brick was thrown through the toilet window while Tate was in it. When he peered outside, a gunman opened fire with a revolver from close range. Tate raised his right arm to shield his face. The bullet hit him in the wrist, travelled up his arm and smashed bones in his elbow. Ellis, who had fallen out with Tate and Tucker, said, quote, "Tate identified me as the gunman, and Tucker and Rolfe told police I had chased them with a pump-action shotgun. I was arrested, but the case was never pursued because checks ruled out my gun as the weapon. But Pat Tate was 100% sure it was me and swore revenge." Ellis told how he fell out with Tucker and Tate last year. He said, quote, "It was all over some silly remark I made on the phone. Next thing I know, Tucker and Rolfe come round to my house in Essex. Tucker stuck a loaded pistol into my temple and threatened to kill me. They then came after me with a machete and threatened to hack off my hand and foot. Then they looted my house and left their filth plastered all over the stuff they left behind. I couldn't take any more of it. I went out and bought a Smith & Wesson for £600 and a bulletproof vest for £400. I might be small, but someone had to stand up to them." Ellis told how after the attempt on Tate's life, he was invited to meet Tate in hospital to sort out a misunderstanding. But he found out Tate had a gun hidden in his hospital bed and was planning to execute Ellis as he stepped through the door. Tate was later jailed for smuggling the weapon into hospital. Ellis has been lying low in the West Country since August after serving 7.5 months jail for illegally possessing firearms. Wearing sunglasses to disguise his identity, he said, quote, "When I was in jail, I had numerous death threats. On one occasion, 2 men came up to me and told me a £10,000 contract had been put out on me. As soon as I got out of prison, I was ordered to leave town. I was told if I ignored the warnings, they would retaliate. A hitman went to my dad's door looking for me. My family were told that Tucker and Tate planned to snatch my little sister and take off her fingers one by one. She was only 15 and terrified. The threats never stopped, and the last one was only 2 weeks ago. These people were nasty, vicious bullies. They will not be missed. They were scum, and Britain is a better place without them. My dad was crying tears of joy when he heard they had been murdered." So to summarise, although I believe that there's clearly a very strong motive here in terms of the threat against the Ellis family, there's nothing evidentially speaking that gives any credibility to the claims put forward by Steve Nipper Ellis. He talks about his dad passing away 4 years before he came forward with this information. He knew obviously that Jack Womes and Michael Steele were in prison. Why would you keep those individuals in prison for that 4-year period after your dad's death and not come forward at the first available opportunity in order to tell the truth? And also, as discussed earlier, if your dad had come forward the next day and said that he had some involvement in the murders or he had in fact killed Tucker, Tate and Rolfe, would you really be conducting interviews with the tabloids, contacting the press, being in the newspaper, almost shining a light and drawing attention to yourself and your family during that time period? I don't personally believe that you would. But most importantly, there's nothing from an evidential standpoint that backs up these claims in any way, shape or form.